Before I tell you what happened, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments because I'm curious if this kind of thing could happen where you live. Now let me take you into that moment, the one I never thought I'd remember so vividly. It started as a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning. The kind where the coffee tasted a little too bitter, the office air felt too dry, and the elevator ride was just another uneventful part of the day. I was carrying a stack of folders against my chest, my mind juggling the day's to-do list. That's when Marcus stepped into the elevator beside me, my boss. Sharp navy suit, sleeves rolled just enough to show the hint of a watch that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. He offered a polite smile as the doors slid shut, his voice warm as he greeted me. We only had 6 floors to go. 6. It should have been over in less than 30 seconds, but halfway between the 4th and 5th floor, the elevator jolted hard. The lights flickered once, twice, and then dimmed into an unsettling amber glow. The gentle hum of motion died. We weren't moving. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence in that metal box was thick, broken only by the faint hum of emergency power. I could hear my own heartbeat. Marcus tilted his head, listening, as if the elevator might give him an explanation. His brow furrowed slightly, the first sign that he wasn't in control of this situation. "Well," he said after a pause, his voice low but steady, "I think we're stuck." He pulled out his phone, tried the signal, and frowned when he saw the single bar flicker away. "You okay?" he asked, turning his gaze toward me. It was such a simple question, but it landed heavier than I expected. Maybe it was the way his eyes softened, or how the stillness made every glance feel amplified. I nodded, though my hands were tightening around the folders. Fine, just not thrilled about being trapped. He chuckled, a quiet, almost reassuring sound. "Guess we'll have to make the best of it." Time seemed to slow in that cramped space. Without the distraction of emails, phone calls, or coworkers popping by, there was nothing between us except the hum of the lights and the occasional creak of the cables above. The air felt warmer than it should have. Or maybe it was just the awareness of being in close quarters with him. Marcus leaned casually against the side panel, his gaze wandering over the elevator walls before settling back on me. "I don't think we've ever had a conversation without interruptions," he said. He was right. Most of our exchanges happened in passing, quick updates, brisk instructions, polite small talk. But here, the usual rhythm of work was gone. Here it was just 2 people in a box with no schedule to keep. I found myself studying him in a way I never had before. The sharp lines of his jaw, the way his shoulders relaxed when he wasn't carrying the weight of a meeting, the quiet focus in his eyes. I'd always respected him professionally, but I'd never considered what it might feel like to see him as just Marcus. The longer we stood there, the more the edges of formality softened. We talked about the building's ancient wiring, then about how both of us preferred taking the stairs but rarely did. Then the conversation drifted to things I didn't expect. His college days, the city he grew up in, how he missed the smell of fresh bread from the bakery near his childhood home. I found myself telling him about my favorite bookstore, the one tucked away on a quiet street where time seemed to pause. The tension wasn't the kind that made you want to escape. It was the kind that made you acutely aware of every shift in body language, every glance, every pause before a sentence. When the intercom finally crackled with a distant voice, saying maintenance was on the way, I realized I felt oddly disappointed. We weren't supposed to be here like this, sharing pieces of ourselves that didn't fit into the normal workday. And yet something about the moment felt too rare to let slip away. Marcus glanced toward the doors, then back at me. His voice was quiet enough that I had to lean slightly closer to catch it. "Guess we'll have to finish this conversation sometime." I just nodded, my throat feeling tighter than it should have. The hum of the elevator's machinery began again. But my thoughts were still caught in that stillness we just shared, wondering if he felt it too. The door slid open with a reluctant groan, and the hallway's cool, conditioned air rushed in. It should have felt like relief, but instead it broke whatever quiet thread had been holding us together in that steel box. Marcus stepped out first, his hand brushing against the edge of the door as if he'd been about to hold it for me, but thought better of it. I followed, still clutching those folders, my mind replaying our conversation in fragments. We walked side by side toward the office, our footsteps echoing down the empty corridor. The building was quieter than usual, a mid-morning lull when most people were buried in meetings or glued to their screens. Marcus's stride was confident but not rushed, and I noticed how his gaze flicked toward me once or twice, just quick enough to catch if I happened to look back. When we reached the office, he paused at his door. "Thanks for, not panicking back there," he said with a small smile. It was such a casual comment, but there was weight behind it. I nodded, unsure how to respond without revealing how much the whole thing had gotten under my skin. I spent the rest of the day trying to bury myself in work. But every so often my eyes drifted toward his office door. Sometimes it was closed, sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of him leaning back in his chair, a hand to his chin, looking deep in thought. I wondered if he was thinking about the elevator, about what we'd said, or about me. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a message popped up on my screen from him. Short, simple. Thought a minute. I walked over, knocking lightly before stepping in. His office always had that faint scent of leather and coffee mixed with something warm and subtle. His cologne, maybe. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "I wanted to check in," he said, leaning forward with his elbows on the desk. That was a strange way to start the day. "Are you sure you're okay?" It was such a simple question again, but the sincerity in his eyes made it feel different. I smiled a little. "I'm fine. Just still thinking about it, I guess." He tilted his head, thinking about being stuck in an elevator. I hesitated, then shook my head. "Not exactly." The corner of his mouth twitched as if he wanted to push but decided against it. Instead, he leaned back, his gaze holding mine for a fraction longer than necessary. "It's strange, isn't it? You can work with someone for years and barely know them, and then a random moment changes everything." That made my pulse quicken, though I tried to hide it. "Yeah, strange." We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that felt deliberate rather than awkward. His office door was still open, but the quiet around us made it feel like we were in our own little space again, like the elevator all over, but without the hum of machinery. Then his phone buzzed, breaking the moment. He glanced at it, his jaw tightening slightly before setting it back down. "I should let you get back to work," he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't quite ready for me to go. As I stood to leave, he added, "Maybe we can grab a coffee sometime." Outside the office, I turned back, meeting his eyes. There was no casualness in the way he said it. It was an invitation, not a throwaway suggestion. My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine. "I'd like that," I said. Walking back to my desk, I felt an odd mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. Something had shifted between us in that elevator, and now it was bleeding into the rest of our interactions. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop replaying the day. His voice in that confined space, the way he'd lean just a little closer to hear me, the look in his eyes when he suggested coffee. I told myself it was harmless, that it was just two people connecting unexpectedly. But a part of me knew that whatever this was, it wasn't going to stay small. We agreed to meet on Saturday morning, a choice that felt intentional. A weekday coffee might have been all business, some harmless chat before heading back to the grind. But a Saturday, that meant stepping outside the safe boundaries of work. I arrived a few minutes early, the small cafe already alive with the comforting aroma of espresso and fresh pastries. It was tucked on a quiet corner, the kind of place you'd only know about if you'd been there before. The lighting was warm and low, sunlight filtering through the tall windows in soft golden streaks. I chose a table near the back, where the hum of conversation was gentler, and the view outside framed the slow-moving street. When Marcus walked in, I felt that familiar shift in the air. He wasn't in a suit this time, just dark jeans, a fitted sweater, and that same quiet confidence. It was strange how much younger he looked without the office armor. His eyes found me almost immediately, and when he smiled, I realized I'd been holding my breath. "Morning," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. His voice was softer here, without the edge of authority. "Hope you didn't wait long." We ordered, and for a while we talked about safe topics, books, old movies, favorite travel spots. But underneath it there was a current. It was in the way he leaned forward when I spoke, in how his gaze lingered just a heartbeat too long, in the pauses where we both seemed to be deciding what to say next. At one point our drinks arrived, and as I reached for my cup, my fingers brushed his. The contact was so light it could have been an accident, but neither of us pulled away right away. There was a moment, just a second, where we both knew we'd noticed. He cleared his throat, leaning back slightly. "I've been thinking about the elevator," he said, his tone careful. I raised an eyebrow. You have? Yeah. About how unexpected it was and how it made me realize I don't really know you. Not like I'd like to. The words hummed between us. It wasn't a question and it didn't need to be. I felt my pulse pick up, but I kept my voice even. Maybe that's something we can change. His smile deepened, slow and deliberate. I was hoping you'd say that. The conversation after that shifted. We still talked about ordinary things, but every exchange carried more weight. I told him about the bookstore I loved, about how I still wrote letters by hand sometimes. He told me about a trip he'd taken alone years ago, one he never talked about at work because it felt too personal. At one point the light through the window caught the side of his face, and I realized how close we'd been sitting. I could see the faint creases near his eyes when he smiled, the way his jaw tightened when he was choosing his words. When we finally stood to leave, he walked me to my car. The air outside was crisp, and for a moment neither of us moved to say goodbye. His hand rested lightly on the car door, his gaze steady on mine. I'm glad we did this, he said quietly. Me too, I replied, my voice softer than I meant it to be. There was a pause long enough for me to wonder if he was about to step closer, but instead he stepped back, giving me a small nod before walking away. I sat in the car for a moment before starting the engine, my hand still resting on the wheel. Something had begun in that elevator, but here outside the office and in the light of day, it was turning into something else entirely, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to slow it down. It was late on a Thursday evening when the building began to empty out. Most of the office had gone home hours ago, but I stayed behind to finish a report. The quiet was different from the daytime hush. It was deeper, the kind of stillness where every small sound carried. The click of my keyboard, the low hum of the lights, even the faint creak of the old heating system felt amplified. I was shutting down my computer when I noticed Marcus's office light still on. Through the glass, I saw him leaning over his desk, his jacket draped across the back of his chair. There was something unguarded about him in that moment, the way he rubbed the bridge of his nose, the faint slump of his shoulders. I knocked lightly and stepped inside. Still working. He looked up and for a moment the weariness faded into a small warm smile. Guilty. You too. I was just finishing up, I said, moving a little closer. Long day, he nodded. One of those weeks where every small thing takes twice as long as it should. He leaned back, letting out a slow breath. But I'm glad you stopped by. The way he said it made me pause. His voice wasn't casual. It was deliberate, almost as if he'd been waiting. I took the chair across from him and for a moment we didn't speak. There was no rush, no pressure to fill the silence. It felt like the quiet in the elevator again, but layered now with everything that had passed since. You've been on my mind, he said finally, his tone measured but sincere. I felt my chest tighten. You've been on mine too. The honesty surprised me, but once the words were out, I didn't want to take him back. He studied me for a long moment, his gaze steady, and then he stood, coming around the desk. Instead of sitting across from me, he rested against the edge of the desk just a foot away. Up close, I could see the small details that only reveal themselves when you're paying attention. The faint stubble along his jaw, the way his eyes seemed to warm when he was focused entirely on you. I don't want to overstep, he said quietly, but I think what happened in the elevator, it made me realize how rare it is to actually connect with someone, and I don't want to ignore that. The words settled between us, and for a moment, the room felt smaller, more intimate. I could hear the faint hum of the lights, the muted traffic outside, even my own heartbeat. I don't either, I replied. Something softened in his expression, a mix of relief and something deeper. He didn't move closer, didn't try to turn the moment into something careless. Instead, he just stood there, letting the quiet speak for both of us. We talked for a while longer about work, about life outside of it, about the strange way people drift in and out of each other's paths. But there was an unspoken understanding in the air, something that didn't need to be rushed or defined. When I finally stood to leave, he walked me to the elevator. This time, it carried us smoothly to the lobby. No jolts, no pauses. But as the doors opened, he gave me a small knowing look, the kind that made my stomach flutter. See you tomorrow, he said. I stepped out into the cool night air, my mind replaying every detail. Whatever this was, it had started in a moment neither of us expected. And now it felt like the beginning of something we both quietly wanted to see through carefully, deliberately, and with a mutual respect that made it feel all the more real.